you and you. I just wish I could like touch each and every one of you and say hello in person. Because normally when I do workshops, I am hugging, I'm high-fiving, I am wanting everyone to feel just a physical manifestation of my encouragement. But since the Rona, better known as COVID-19, has changed all of our plans, we're going to make the best of it. And I'm going to make sure to give you as much energy and encouragement, and you are going to feel it through this cyberspace and through these cyber waves. So, my name is Myra Rollins, and I'm an occupational therapist. I've been a therapist for 20 years. What's that? Well, thank you. Y'all all didn't hear them, but someone just said they can't believe I'm a day over 25. I flatter myself, I digress, and now I push on. So, in my 20 years of therapy experience, most of that has been working with patients in long term care, and it's been amazing. Not every day. Some days are challenging, and I'm sure you can say the same. Some days are frustrating, and I'm sure you can say the same. But I can also say that they have been rewarding and fulfilling, and the journey for me has been amazing. And I can say that the journey of therapy and working with patients with dementia has been rewarding because I get to clock out. I understand, and it's not lost on me, that the difference in your experience and mine is that when 3 o'clock or 4:30 rolls around and I punch that clock, I can leave the dealings and the frustrations of dementia-related care at the job. I even have a ritual. I go to my car, and before I crank it up and pull out of the parking lot, I take my shoes off, let them breathe, let the dogs breathe a little bit, take off my scrub top because it has just what I call people on it. And I put it to the side, and I often thought that it was just me trying to make sure that I wasn't spreading germs to my home and things of that nature. And though that's true, I realize now that I do it primarily as a mental way to detach. That I understand that I leave it there and I'm going to my world and my normal. But for you, I understand that full-time caregiving, there's no clocking in and out. Did somebody just say amen? I understand that this journey that you're on is different than mine because it is repetitive and it is continuous. And for that, I salute you. But not only do I salute you, I want to support you. And when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about, I was really like, how can I encourage them? Encourage, revive, refresh. And I want to do that for you. And I am going to do that for you. But what I also wanted to make sure is that we got real and that we did some real work that would last. Because the things that I'm going to tell you will require that you continue to dig into the details. What I'm going to give you today is just top line stuff, but it is going to take your commitment. That if I give a buzzword like resentment, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to dig into, am I continuously resentful? And what can I do about it? Yes, I can tell you about deep breathing because it works. Yes, I can tell you about going for walks because it helps. But unless we deal with the root of what's overwhelming you, all the other little fruits and little tactics won't fix it. And so I understand that the journey of caregiving can put you in 3 different categories. So think about caregiving like an ocean. Anybody want to go to a beach? I'm so ready for Rona to go away so I can go on vacation. And I love being in the water. It is one of my favorite things to do. And so think of an ocean and waves. And so there's 3 ways that you can handle being in an ocean. One of them is float. Floating doesn't take much energy, time, or effort. You just coast. So that's a category of caregiving that does not exist. It is fictional. If you ever meet someone that's caregiving and they say, oh, it's always rosy and I have all these systems and they all work, they're not telling the truth. So I've never met a floater caregiver, but there are two other categories: sinkers and swimmers. And by the end of this conference, I want you to feel confident that you can be in the category of a swimmer. So let me tell you a quick definition. A sinker that's caregiving is overcome constantly and consistently by the waves of caregiving. They are financially, emotionally, spiritually, and physically drowning all the time. Somebody say all the time. All right. Now, the best caregivers can sometimes live in that state of physically and emotionally drowning. It happens to the best of caregivers. But the key word here is that they live in a state, the sinkers do, in perpetual drowning under the waves of caregiving. But then I've met swimmers, and there is a cataclysmic divide, and you can tell them a mile away when you see a swimmer. Yes, the swimmer is still sometimes tired. Yes, swimmers sometimes snap and get annoyed. But for the most part, swimmers have found a rhythm that allows them to handle the waves of caregiving in a way that does not exhaust and overwhelm. And some of you are saying, I don't believe it. There's no way. I promise you, I have met many, many swimmers. And as I meet sinkers and swimmers, every day I meet them, I understand differences because as I talk with them and meet with them and work with them, there are blaring differences. And so what I wanted to do today is just share with you some of those observations. So the first thing is that sinkers often live in a perpetual state of resentment. And this is where we're going to have to do some real work. I don't want to make anyone feel shame because there is no shame in feeling resentment. Sometimes you are not alone if you feel resentment. Every caregiver on this call and in the world feels resentment at some point. But what I've noted about a sinker is that they live in a constant state of resentment. And you can spot a sinker that's in resentment by they often are angry all the time. Not annoyed, not slightly, not sometimes, but all the time. Sinkers who are living in resentment, often always, even when they're away from their loved ones, they often find themselves thinking and replaying negative incidents that happen. So even distance cannot distract them from the negative aspects of caregiving. Sinkers who are living in resentment also are filled with regret. Now again, not occasional regret, but perpetual regret of asking themselves, why didn't I move away when I had the chance? Why did I even marry him? Why didn't I take that job? And it is constant, and they allow themselves to dwell in that line of thinking. And then another way that you can spot a sinker who's stuck in resentment is that they no longer feel that it's a mother-daughter relationship or a husband and wife, but they often have changed the relationship to one of authority and power. Because oftentimes resentment manifests through the person who is resentful putting themselves in a position of power over the person that they're resentful towards. So those are a few things that allow you to spot a sinker that's locked in resentment. But listen, the swimmers that I've met, and they exist, the swimmers that I've met, they don't allow themselves to get stuck in a cycle of resentment. When they feel themselves on that hamster wheel, they get off. And let me tell you how they get off. They make the decision, and here we go, because it is a decision, because again, everyone feels it at some point. But a swimmer decides to get off the hamster wheel of resentment by not allowing themselves to dwell on what life could have or should have been. They don't allow themselves to think about constantly and consistently what could have been if this hadn't happened. Now, they're real, and they do for a short season from time to time mourn the quality of life that they would have preferred for them or their loved one. But once they sit in that for a little while, they decide to change their thinking to what life is and begin to embrace their reality. Sinkers also, when they feel themselves in a cycle of resentment, they also choose to get off by learning not to sweat the small stuff. And another way to put it is that they wisely pick their battles. Let me give you an example. So just last week, I had a resident who was at the table for breakfast, and she had coffee and orange juice. And she decided to mix her coffee with her orange juice. And her daughter was there, and it drove her daughter bananas. And so there was a literal tug of war for the coffee cup. And her daughter was getting so upset, and her mom wouldn't let it go. And I was trying to avoid an explosion of coffee and orange juice. And I came over and I said, "Hey, Miss Such and Such, good morning." And I said, "What's the problem?" And the daughter would just explain to me the situation. And she said, "It doesn't make sense. No one drinks that." And I'm trying to tell her. And I touched her hand and I said, "Hey, what's the worst case scenario?" And I actually made her answer the question. I said, "What two things could happen right now?" And she said, "Well, she's gonna drink it and not like it." And I said, "And that's okay." And then I answered it. I asked her, I said, "What if she does like it?" "Well, that's gross." But I said, "But what would happen?" And she said, "Well, I guess nothing." And so I was trying to coach her in the fact that if this is a battle that doesn't cause harm to her or anyone else, why fight it? Why sweat it? I had another client whose daughter hated the fact that her father would have this repetitive behavior of going to check the window. He would check the window, look out of it, and go sit back down. Not even 5 minutes later, he would go and check the window and sit back down. And she was constantly trying to rationalize and just let him understand there's nothing at the window. You checked it 5 minutes ago. And she would constantly try to redirect. And so in one of my home health care visits, she brought this up to me. And I said, again, I asked her, "What's the worst case scenario?" "Well, he's going to do that all day. He's just going to do it all day." And I said, "That's okay." And I said, "Is it hurting him? Is it causing harm to his heart or his legs?" And I said, "It's actually probably pretty healthy. He's getting exercise." And I said, "So no, it's not normal behavior, but we know that our loved ones with dementia and Alzheimer's don't have normal brains. So we should not expect normal behavior. But we need to ask ourselves just a few questions. Is this behavior harmful? Is it hurting anyone? And if not, let me not sweat it." So that is another way that caregivers who choose not to be resentful, they get off that hamster wheel cycle. So I want to pause right now and ask you to reflect on a situation, a battle that you chose to fight that drove you absolutely mad. And ask yourself, was that a battle that I could have just let go? Think about it for a minute. What was the last situation that you and your loved one had a tug of war with? That if you would have chosen not to sweat the small stuff, what's the worst thing that could have happened? Okay? And so here's the thing. Instead of asking, is this normal? Ask yourself, what does it hurt if they did this? Because trust me, and you know this better than I do, that you should save your time, energy, and effort for the next battle, because there will be one, don't you know? All right, another way that caregivers choose not to live in the cycle of resentment is that they don't take things personal. And this one, I know, is a tough one. Let me give you an example of how I know that it's tough. Just last week, I was working with a new resident to me, and the other therapist told me how difficult she was. And I made it my mission to have a wonderful therapy session with her. And she was actually doing really good work with me. I was bringing out all the stops, all the techniques, and we were doing some great therapy. I was sweating. I was working hard. Do you hear me? And so in the middle of a session that I thought was one of my best career sessions ever, she stops me and she says, "Honey, I don't mean to offend you." And you all know that when someone says they don't mean to offend you, what follows will be offensive. Well, she said, honey, I don't mean to offend you, but you don't know what the hell you're doing. And for a second, it shocked me. And I was like, how could you? I'm working so hard. I thought we were doing great. But I clicked into the fact that I don't take things personal. Clients with dementia, they have no filter. And I know that. They also often have paranoid thoughts. So if your husband is accusing you of cheating, don't take it personal. We know that is a classic sign of dementia, paranoid thoughts. If your loved one never shows appreciation, it's not personal. They at this point do not have the capacity to do so. If your mom only remembers your sister's name and that sister never comes around, don't take it personal. It is not about her love for you. It is about the capacity of her brain. So caregivers who choose not to live in resentment, they don't take it personal. They don't sweat the small stuff, and they choose to physically not dwell on what life could have or should have been. So that's the first big nugget that separates the sinkers from the swimmers. Instead of being resentful, they choose, and it honestly is a choice of intention. Instead of living in resentment, they find ways to embrace their reality. So I want you to say it. Yes, I want you to physically say it out loud right now. I want you to say, I choose not to live in resentment, but I choose to embrace and accept my reality. All right, I trust that you said it. Okay, so now another difference in the sinkers and the swimmers. The sinkers, who are being overcome by the waves of caregiving, are reactors. And let me tell you what I mean by that. That their every decision and behavior is emotionally charged. It's either driven by anger or by fear or by sadness. And so they're reactors. Sinkers are rarely prepared. They're often unorganized and they seem very, very scattered. They forget appointments. They often have to reschedule conflicting appointments. When they come to the therapy clinic or the doctor, they want immediate assistance because they don't have much time or margin in their schedule. They're often frustrated because people aren't available when they need them to be available, and sinkers often react. But swimmers, and I want you to be a swimmer, so listen in. Swimmers don't operate in reaction. They respond. And there is a big difference between reacting and responding. And let me tell you the difference. So what happens is with the responders, the swimmers, they often have schedules. Now I'm not talking about this rigid, unflexible, military-like schedule. But what I am speaking of is just a general outline of the day and the week that allows the caregiver and for their loved one to know what's going on, to know that I have an appointment in 2 weeks, to have a general time that lunch and dinner is. And this way it leaves room for less error. So do you know what time or when the next appointment for your dad is or for your mom is? Do you use a calendar? Do you set reminders in your phone? How do you keep a schedule? Again, not this rigid system, but just some general outline of what the days and the weeks ahead involve. So, swimmers have schedules and they also have systems. And there's a big difference between schedules and systems, and you need them both. So let me tell you the difference. A schedule just says very specific, an 8 o'clock appointment or a 10 o'clock appointment. But a system is a broader way of getting the schedule accomplished. Let me tell you, give me an example. So let's just say your mom has an 8 o'clock doctor's appointment schedule. But a system would be if you go to that 8 o'clock doctor's appointment and then you go to check out, and the nurse says, we need a follow-up appointment. What time would you like? Well, because you know that your mom is much better in the morning. Her attitude is better. Her energy level is better. You get better compliance in the morning. then your system says, I do only morning appointments when available. So when that nurse asks you, what time do you want to schedule the follow up? You're going to tell her, my system is appointments in the morning. So the schedule is Thursday at 8, but the system says, I do morning appointments. Another example would be mealtime. Let's say you do generally dinner at 5. But the system is that, oh, I know that my husband, if I try to herd him to another activity and don't allow good transition, he gets aggravated. So your system would say 30 minutes before any meal, I start telling dad, hey dad, it's almost time to eat. Hey dad, you might want to turn off the TV, it's time to eat. So your system says, I give dad 30 minutes at least for transitions. So what I want you to do right now is think about the systems that you have in place or that you need to establish, and then also think about your schedule. So give me one schedule and then a system that would help you accomplish that schedule. Now I'm going to give you a few seconds, not to vet the whole thing, but just to simply jot it down. What's a schedule that I need to keep, and what's a system that would help me accomplish that schedule? Take a few seconds. All right, so we're talking about sinkers and swimmers and how swimmers are most often prepared, and they are prepared because they have schedules and systems, and they also have, the third thing is serious conversations. They're talking to their siblings about, hey, if and when mom progresses, what are our plans? They're talking to their employers and saying, hey, I'm caregiving for my mom. Right now she's able to stay at home, but if things change, what are my options? They are talking to their financial planner and looking at, if I have to come home from work to take care of mom, what do I need? They are having death and burial conversations. They are having serious conversations so that they can begin to plan. So what I want you to do right now is ask yourself and jot it down. What are some serious conversations you need to have? And give yourself a timeline to accomplish that. Do you need to speak with your mom's doctor or her therapy team? Do you need to speak with your sister or brother or children? So really quick, write down a few serious conversations that you need to have that will allow you to either gravitate into or stay in the swimmer category. Give you a few seconds for that. And the reason that I'm taking a few pauses, even as silly as I may look just sitting here waiting on you, is because I want this to be a workshop to where, again, you take what we talk about and not just leave it here, but actually have some action items to go do. And I love to encourage you and pump you up, but it would not serve you justice if I just cheerleaded for you. I want you to take these principles and go work the plan. So that is the reason for the silly little pauses that I'm doing. All right, so the last thing that I've noticed about sinkers and swimmers is that sinkers are most often just run down. And again, I'm not saying that they don't have, that it's a bad day. I'm saying that every day is the worst day of their lives. They're tired. They're not eating well. They don't have any other relationships outside of the person that they're caregiving with, because they don't pour into other friendships and other families because they're consumed by caregiving. They don't have any outside hobbies or interests, and it begins to just run them down. But a swimmer chooses not to be run down by having appropriate respite. And by respite, I mean just by a system of rest that allows them to detach and decompress. Somebody say detach. Somebody say decompress. You cannot avoid being tired, but you can avoid having a lifestyle of exhaustion. And so there's two types of respite that I think that I want you to focus on. One is more of an episodic respite. That means that, hey, I want to go on vacation, so I'm going to pay for mom to stay at a nursing facility for a week. Or I'm going to pay a caregiver to come twice a week to sit with mom while I go do something for myself. Or I'm going to ask a neighbor to come sit with them for a couple of hours. And I may not leave the house, but I may just go upstairs to read a book. But this is a consistent rhythm and intentional time that they set aside for them to have a decompress time and a decompress period, and to just be uniquely them. And I want you to listen to this. It is unfortunate that dementia, how can I put this? Your loved one is slowly losing pieces of who they are, and that's the reality. But it does not have to be the reality that you slowly lose pieces of yourself. So that's why it is so important to have these episodic respites to where you can tap into the things that make you, you. And I give you permission to continue to foster those. Dementia is unfortunately slowly taking pieces of your loved one, but you do not have to also believe that you have to forego pieces of yourself as well. So what I want you to do is write down a few things that you want to do. Is it a vacation? Do you want to travel a little bit more and you feel that there's no way that can happen? Let's write that down. Write 1 or 2 goals of things that you want to do for yourself, and it would be a respite for you. And so swimmers also, the episodic respites, but they also have routine respites. And what I mean by that is a daily or weekly, on the calendar, consistent thing that they do. Is it a walk in the park every single Wednesday? Is it, I'm going to get a book, and before mom wakes up, I get my book and my coffee and I read and have a moment for myself? It's that I go to Zumba 2 days a week. What is it that you, on your journey to becoming a swimmer, what can you build in on a daily and consistent basis that allows you a period of respite? So the episodic respites are the, I hate to say bigger things, but the vacations, or I'm going to get away for a longer chunk of time. But the routine respites are more smaller snippets of things that you do strategically to revive and refresh yourself on an ongoing basis. So now with this one, what I want you to do is have a column or rows. Which one is it? I don't know, I forget. I'm going to say sections, 3 sections. And what I want you to do is put an activity or an event that you want to build into your schedule as a respite for you every single day or every single week. Once you write 1 or 2 of those down, I want you to put in the next section the time and the frequency by which that occurs. And then once you do that, I want you to write down what measures or plans or systems you need to put in place to make that happen. Now I'm going to give you a few seconds. You're not going to be able to finish the whole column, but I want to start you on your way. That a commitment that I want you to make is that when we end this call, and next week or tomorrow, you're going to take this chart back out, and I want you to work the chart. What respite periods do I need to build in on a daily and weekly basis? What time and frequency do they occur? And how and what systems do I need to put in place to make them happen? So, I just want to do a quick recap because I want you to be a swimmer. And again, there's no such category as a floater or a coaster of caregiving. Floaters doesn't take much work. It's on autopilot. It is what it is. I'm just chilling. The very nature of caregiving does not allow for floaters or coasters. But you don't have to be a sinker. You can be a swimmer. And just as a quick recap, swimmers, they resist and release resentment, and they embrace their reality. They are not reactors, they're responders. They're more planful and they're ready and prepared. And lastly, they choose not to be run down, but they are intentional about respite. So again, I salute you. And I am getting ready to, when I end this call, I'm clocking out, and I understand that my journey ends here. But yours is continuous, and I understand that. And I want you to know that I support you and that you can be a swimmer. And a swimmer is something that takes intention, but it is possible. So thank you so much. And I pray that you have felt my cyber energy, and that even if it's one or two nuggets that you have taken from this to implement in your life. So go and continue to swim and journey on.